Now we're going to switch gears and talk about social influence. The broadest social influence is culture, a set of shared values and beliefs and attitudes that lead to norms of behavior or expected behavior. And we know that common values often lead to common behavior. And ethnocentrism is the idea that we often view other cultures through our own cultural lens, which leads us to misunderstanding, you know, what their values are, and more importantly, in marketing, what their current and future behavior is. Now, we're going to focus more on microcultures. So within any culture, there can be microcultures, a smaller group of people with a different set of beliefs and values on some aspect that leads to different behavior and preferences with respect to the consumption of your brand. And we can easily observe or notice other microcultures: race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age. And what I would advise is that you try to be creative in understanding what are different microcultures. Groups of people large enough so they're significant, who have a different set of beliefs and values about some aspect of life, that lead to specific ways they consume products and brands. So whether they're into gaming, or there's a group of people who are neurodiverse, uh, you know, there's a typo there. Environment, people who are feel strongly about the environment, people who are adopt technology really quickly. Fashion and beauty has become huge these days. Diet and food preferences, health, active lifestyle are just some. So be creative in identifying different groups of people who have a common set of beliefs that affect or you can market to. Another important idea that's a little smaller is the idea of roles, right? So oftentimes we play or have multiple roles in our life. For example, you're an adult, you're a student, you might be a son or a daughter, a brother or a sister, a classmate, an athlete, a teammate, a friend, an employee, etc. Okay, and it's really hard to meet all the expectations for all those different roles that we may have. So you're a serious student, but also you have to be a really good athlete and be dedicated, and you have to spend time with your friends. And if you have a child or a son or a daughter, and then you may have a romantic relationship. Those are all difficult things, given that there's only 24 hours in a day. For example, my wife is career oriented. She wants to be a caring, loving mother, and she wants to be a really good wife. There's a lot of conflict because there's just not enough hours in the day to do all those things. So those provide opportunities for marketers to provide brands and services that enable people to fulfill more of those expectations in the different roles that they have. So what we're going to do next is kind of look at an example of why microculture is important, and I'm really drawing this from my life. So we're going to look at which groups consume the most and least rice in the U.S. Now, unfortunately, some of this data is old, but after doing some research, it still holds today, by and large. So what group eats the least amount of rice in the U.S.? Well, that's non-Hispanic white. White people eat the least amount of rice. But many white people, their origins go back to Europe, Northern Europe. My wife's family ate potatoes 6 days out of every week, and on the seventh day they ate pasta. What's the next group? Non-Hispanic black. All right. Now there are groups that eat more rice than others. The Low Country in the South, Alabama, Georgia, Carolinas, Louisiana, Mississippi, right? Influenced by French cooking and Caribbean. So who then eats the second most? It's Hispanic, right? And this is back in 2000. Most data is 2008, All right, so they're above. So who eats the most? It says other race and ethnicity, but it's largely Asian. So remember, Asian includes, Japanese, Korean, Cambodian, that part of Asia, but also includes India and Pakistan and the Middle East. So rice consumption, really varies by microculture. And we can see total rice consumption, it's, gone up, 20% from 4,000 to 5,000, right, over the years. There has been a steady increase, not a dramatic increase. This is about the same year that study ended, and all the way out to, a couple of years ago. So, me being white, and most of the time when I bought rice or my wife went shopping and bought rice, the rice was located in the pasta aisle, especially when, back in 2005, 2010. And it would be, a bag of rice like over here, like Carolina rice to the right in the top row, and Uncle Ben's. I didn't realize that there were so many different types of rice, right? Until I went to Sam's Club one day and saw all these different brands that they had, right? And also that it came in much bigger quantities, 10-pound, 20-pound bags of rice. Because those groups, and people who buys it, the heavy users of rice, people who consume rice on almost a daily basis, right? And then, you can look at it, well, if we mapped it geographically, most of the heavy rice consumption, it was probably going to be more urban, certainly not rural, but even more urban than suburban, because you have, early immigrants over and current immigrants often in urban environments. So they eat a lot of rice, whether they're Asian or Hispanic. And then distribution. I mean, we would shop at a suburban supermarket, right? Stop and Shop or Big Y, right? And, by 2020 or a little earlier, they had, adjusted where they put the rice and the quantities. But in an urban environment, there's not a lot of supermarkets. Change is not as common. So if you're selling rice and you're trying to reach the heavy users of rice, you have to be in local, smaller, food stores, whether it's an Asian market or a bodega. And, that means you need different distribution and you need help filling those. And then finally, even marketing communications and advertising is affected because not, everybody, especially if they're recently emigrated to the United States, so whether they're Indian or Hispanic and they're speaking, and reading, their native language, haven't really mastered all of the English. So, certainly we see advertising on TV and radio for Spanish speaking people. And where we used to live, there was a very nice development that was put in, after we lived there for a while. And many of the people who lived on the street were of Indian descent. And they had, very good jobs and made a lot of money, had big houses, and all the utilities were underground. So they get cable and they get their internet and their electricity and so forth. Many of them had dishes on their houses. Why? Because they could get Indian television. So again, it's just that, hey, if you're Carolina rice, you're Uncle Ben's, and you're selling kind of plain white rice to white people, you're missing the boat because there's a big difference in microculture. So we're going to talk about social class, right? So we all kind of have an understanding of what social class, right? It's a hierarchy, so there's an ordering to it, and we all know that it's better to be at the top than to be at the bottom. So it's usually portrayed, as a triangle because, we know nowadays, there's an upper part and then there's a lower part. and so forth. And you don't need to know the different levels and stuff. You can slice that triangle into different levels however that you want to. Okay? But again, all right, we know that there's this kind of hierarchy, right? This levels, status, all right? And so that different groups have. So what determines your social class? Well, it's a lot of different things. It can be your occupation, your income, your wealth, your education level, where you live, possessions, and everything, right? And oftentimes, we display our social class through public products, meaning that ones that other people can see. What kind of car we drive, what kind of clothing we're wearing, what kind of shoes we have, all right? What our fashion looks like, all right? How our beauty is, and so forth, right? The truth is, in the United States, compared to other cultures, we have fairly mobile social class. That you can go from the outhouse to the penthouse, and you can just as quickly go from the penthouse to the outhouse, all right? Other cultures, it's much more fixed, right? And the older example would be India with the caste system, where you have to be born into it, your social class. That's it, and you can't move, and so forth. But the biggest determinant of your social class in the United States is the one you're born into. There's just much more mobility. So how do marketers, react to social class? Well, oftentimes they market different brands for different social classes. So here are some simple examples. Busch Beer, Budweiser, Michelob, all made by the company that owns Anheuser-Busch. I can't remember their name. All right. GM, the car manufacturer, they make Chevrolets. That's for, middle America and lower. Buick, right? It's a little more upscale. Pretty much the same vehicles, but just made to be a little more statusy. And at the very top is Cadillac. Toyota owns Lexus. They develop Lexus so they can get into the luxury car market. Old Navy, less expensive. Actually, Old Navy's done really well, right? Because it's not really restrained by social class. Then the Gap, and then Banana Republic. They're all owned by the Gap, right? So again, you're painting different strokes for different folks. And nowadays, we know that, marketers have been aiming at a upper class that's, growing and most has, most of the money. And we have the shrinking middle class. And so then they're aiming products at people who are at the lower middle class and below.